Welcome to TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight. The purpose of this podcast is to provide you with a candid conversation about our energy needs, our energy security, and your energy future. Texas oil and natural gas have made our nation the world's energy leader, constantly innovating and investing to fuel the economy, protect the environment, and power the world. This industry is fast-paced, high-tech, and essential to improving modern life. And we're here to talk about it. You're listening to TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight. Welcome back to another episode of TXOGA Talks. Our purpose is to give you a candid conversation about the topics that impact the lives of Texans. Normally, we focus on take a deep dive on issues related to oil and gas. But because the 89th session of the Texas legislature just ended, we thought it'd be important to bring with you some really inside views about what happened at your Texas Capitol right behind us. And there's no one better to do that with former Speaker of the House, Dennis Bonnen. Dennis, glad to be with you today. I first met this guy back in 1997, and my first impression of you, Dennis, was a pair of shoes that had the soles worn out and the holes were in them.
Yes.
And so I didn't know if this guy couldn't afford shoes or he's been putting the miles on the pavement.
I kept resoling them. I'd resold them twice. That was my first campaign, and it was truly burning the shoe leather. And I had knocked thousands upon thousands of doors. So I kept those in the office to remind me that it's really about the people back home that you knocked on that door and had that conversation with that were crazy enough to give you a vote, which you know that feeling, and send you to Austin. But that's who you're here for.
Well, it is, and you certainly lived that your entire career. You spent a little over 20-plus years, right? Almost 25 years as a member of the Texas House of Representatives. Highlighted his career as Speaker of the Texas House, served as Chairman of Ways and Means and several other committees.
Environmental reg,
very important to protecting our environment and making certain we have a growth of opportunity for business and jobs here in this state. So thanks for your service.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, Dennis, every session, it seems to me, folks, you remember that the Texas legislature, by our Constitution, meets for 140 days every 2 years for regular sessions. And so, Dennis, I think every session kind of has its own identity, it seems.
That's right.
And this one started a little differently than many with a contested speaker's race. So having gone through that personally and watched it here, tell us a little bit your observations there.
It's something that I feel people are looking right past a little, and that's actually a good thing. That means they actually did well. So you're not all thinking about the difficult beginning. But what I mean they're looking past is that this was the first speaker's race in the history of the Texas House where you did not have what's called the speaker statute. And you know what that is, but I'll make sure our friends out there know. The speaker statute was something that was done that said you cannot have outside money, outside influence in a speaker's race. You cannot pressure Dennis Bonnen, you cannot pressure Todd Staples on who they would vote for to be their leader, their speaker.
So it was all basically inside baseball from member to member prior to this session.
And you couldn't go put money and run ads in Todd Staples' district saying he better not vote for Dennis Bonnen or he better vote for Dennis Bonnen or what have you. And so this is the first time that dollars were able to just flow freely. And boy, did they. And what that created was probably the harshest speaker's race we've ever seen. And, you know, I've been doing this since 97 like you have, and you were before that. I've never seen a speaker's race that was decided on the House floor on opening day.
I hadn't either. And no one, Dennis, that I've talked to that's been down here a lot longer than me has ever seen that themselves either.
And the reason that's significant beyond the obvious, but there's a lot of importance to that. So when I got elected speaker, I knew I was going to be speaker, and I went and held a press conference in November and said, I've got the votes. I'm going to be the Speaker of the House. And I got to do what most speakers get to do, new speakers. You transition. I went out and raised money. Boroughs never got a chance to raise $1. I went out and hired staff. I got to do all the things you do in planning.
Process,
That's right. And so whether it was Boroughs or Cook, obviously it was Boroughs, they didn't get that opportunity. I literally called Senator Duncan the day before session started and said, hey, if this works out, you might want to be in Austin tomorrow. And he goes, well, no one had asked me to be here. Well, he ended up being Speaker Burrow's chief of staff.
Yep.
But the point is, even the day before, there was no planning, there was no organization. The whole goal was winning that race on that day.
Right.
And so that put the House, not just Speaker Burrow's, but it put the House at a disadvantage because they had no preparation for who their leadership was going to be and how that was going to go. And I think because they actually, in the end, did a really good job, we kind of forget what a really historic, challenging, and unforeseen start they went through.
And so that's so important that you bring that up because there's, beside the Speaker, there's 149 other House members. There are dozens of different committees that have to be chairman chosen for, membership chosen for. And so Dustin Burrows hit the ground running, probably got no sleep is my guess, but put together an amazing team of staff that at his level, and then put together the leadership team that really accomplished some major things that will impact the lives of Texans for this year and years beyond. Some pretty big topics. So what I'd like us to do today is to focus on some of those topics. Taxes are kind of important.
Very important.
The most important thing I always thought that the legislature did was public education and our education system. Our criminal justice system is kind of important. And I think the legislature touched on a lot of these different items. And so what I thought would be a good idea today, let's just start out with education. House Bill 2, State Representative Brad Buckley from the Temple area, I think,
Temple, Killeen, Salado, that's right.
That area, Central Texas, and State Senator Brandon Creighton, both passed House Bill 2 that will have a big infusion of dollars into our public education system. Let's talk a little bit about that.
So House Bill 2, and I'm not going to keep going back to this, but it's another great example. I mean, they knew they'd work on an issue like this, but Dr. Buckley on the House side, he was chair of public ed. He continued to be, but you're never certain of that. You know, they kind of had to pick up a major school finance bill in February. Normally, you come into session and that thing's largely not finished, but certainly the structure and the foundation has been put together. So Dr. Buckley and Senator Creighton did a phenomenal job. House Bill 2 does amazing things. It puts, as you know, $8.5 billion new dollars into the system.
Right?
That's with the B, $8.5 billion with new dollars. And what's significant about that is that they put money into the basic allotment, which is what members wanted on the House and Senate side. And then they did about $4 billion to pay the teachers. And that's a big deal. And, you know, and it's something that our business community talks about all the time. Education matters because if you're not educating the future workforce, I can't bring jobs here. And so Texas made yet another massive financial commitment and structural commitment to improving public education. And as you said, Dr. Buckley and Brandon Creighton did a lot in that. Within that bill, too, you have where they created $1 billion, $1.5 billion of, I'm calling it, no one else, probably soft cost, where those school districts have the discretion to cover, you know, some insurance costs and do some things like that. We have a lot of partners in the oil and gas industry. They're on the Gulf Coast to some degree. They also, one of the things, I don't know if it was House Bill 2, but I think it's a big insurance issue within education where they're actually going to help those coastal districts on their insurance costs because that windstorm insurance really can get highly expensive on that coast. So anyhow, House Bill 2 did a lot of significant things. The most significant thing of all is they put $8.5 billion more into education in Texas.
Well, as an industry, oil and gas is one of the biggest taxpayers in Texas. And I can tell you, we're real proud of the legislature of putting that level of commitment into our public education system. And we think that will advance the ball. Our workforce, our next generation of students need to be challenged. We want results. We want, it's so important for those kids' lives, for their parents to be challenged early on. And we're real thankful for our teachers and our administrators who work to make that happen. Another area that Senator Creighton and Representative Buckley worked on was something that was kind of a little bit controversial last election cycle.
It changed the House.
It really did, didn't it?
It changed the House.
Governor Abbott made it a priority to ensure that we had the Texas Education Freedom Act to give some latitude for parents that wanted to change their children's educational environment. It didn't pass last session. I think there were special sessions after one another.
Three.
Oh, I hate
The most brutal thing on earth is a special session. Yeah,
it really is. Folks, the governor is the only one by Constitution that can call a special session, and Governor Abbott did, and it never was accomplished. So he made it a part of his campaign cycle, and it passed. It was Senate Bill 2. Tell us a little bit of the mechanics of Senate Bill 2.
I think they did a great job on Senate Bill 2. You know, and I want to be clear, there are folks who will never be comfortable with the concept of school choice. And you know, I joke about it. Those are for it, call school choice. Those are against it, call vouchers. Okay.
Right.
And so, but they actually did really good work here. And I want to be clear, setting aside whether you're for or against it, they passed it. So you got to look at the positive product they created. And I think they did a very positive work. And again, phenomenal. And I think I want to keep going to this because it's something that matters. You want to make good policy. You want to make your state a great place to bring jobs and invest. You got to have collaborative efforts in your legislative governing bodies. And that's what we saw here with Senate Bill 2 and with House Bill 2. And so what's great about that bill is that $1 billion, and it's $1 billion that's allocated to go to school choice. But what they did is that they prioritized in a massive way special needs students and then low income students. And so
those are kind of the first in line.
Exactly.
Is the way it works. Okay.
The money goes there first. Okay. And so I'll pick on me and my family. I'm dyslexic. My son Gregory is dyslexic. And so I would be in line, but then I'm not in a financial need, thank God. And so Gregory would have had the opportunity behind kids who were special needs and financially disadvantaged. Yeah. And so that money's not going to wealthy people who want to send their kid to a private school. That money will be overwhelmingly, like 95% of those dollars are going to go first to the special needs student with low income, and then a special needs student who is a little bit above low income. And so that's what the mission here was to give those parents an option, give those parents a choice in that educational opportunity. And I know some of the public schools were not happy about this, but my perspective has always been, again, we go to our own story. But, my parents were, I was lucky. They made the personal commitment, sacrifice. But, they drove me 45 minutes up the highway for fourth grade to go to Red Reading School for dyslexic students in Bel Air, Texas, because they could.
Right.
Now, they sacrificed to do it. It wasn't that easy. But my point is, I then went back to the public schools. I needed a good year of immersive opportunity in a school that focused on my need. And so I don't think it's bad for a parent to have that opportunity.
You really make a good point, and it's what we all know. There's no one size fits all when it comes to education. There are customized needs. And so if you're a listener today and you're either for it or you're against it, the thing that I think about is this legislature meets at least once every 2 years for 5 months. And the top priority of the Texas legislature still today is education. And that consumes the lion's share of the budget. The budget is about $330 billion, I think, which is a lot more than it used to be. But folks, Texas is a lot bigger than it used to be too. We're continuing to grow. So it's good to see that education does draw down the most funding, and that if you are uncomfortable with the way things are going right now, there's an opportunity to tweak that. Well, that's a lot on education. There's a lot more that we could cover, but I want to get into some other topics as well, because people are tired of the high level of property taxes. I mean, government has to be funded, folks. There's either an income tax, there's a property tax, there are use taxes, there are fees that are hidden taxes in a lot of ways. And so the real goal from the way you and I worked together so well over the years was, let's keep government accountable, let's keep government limited, and let's keep a close watch on public expenditure of dollars. The legislature did have a surplus, and so they used that in some beneficial ways. I know Senator Paul Bettencourt, Representative Morgan Meyer, both were instrumental and carried some legislation. Won't you talk a little bit about Senate Bill 4, and maybe you want to start about the bigger issue of all the options on the table there?
Yeah, so I remember when I first became chair of Ways and Means, which Morgan Meyer chairs Ways and Means and carried Senate Bill 4, and of course, Senator Bettencourt over in the Senate is really kind of their guru on tax policy. And so I remember in 15, we brought in everybody. And I kind of told the committee, don't pick your favorite tax cut yet. Let's hear from everyone. Let's hear from experts, and let's hone in. And so at the end of the day, the one you hear the most about is the property tax.
Right.
Now, I probably shouldn't, but I'll be candid about this. I don't absolutely love what they did. I'm concerned that continuing to raise the homestead exemption is driving us towards a split tax roll, which is not great policy for business. Because,
and folks, a split tax roll, just so you understand, is that you don't have everyone in the wagon moving along at the same time. You've got certain taxpayers that pay certain level of taxation and another a higher level.
That's right.
And that creates winners and losers rather than everybody working toward the same goal of let's lower the tax burden.
That's right.
Yeah.
Rate compression is the best answer.
Best example.
And so what they did, and I want to be clear, cutting taxes is a good thing, no matter what. When you reduce someone's tax burden, that's a good thing. But I think there are ways to be more strategic and more to the overall environment of driving investment to your state. But they raised that homestead exemption.
And one more thing to point out is there is no state property tax.
No.
I mean, it's all a local school district tax. However, the state does have an ability to influence that because they can backfill, and that's what you're talking about them doing right now.
Look, this budget of $330 billion, over $50 billion, 50 billion, over that number is baked into that budget forever for property tax reductions that the state is paying down on a local level.
And so what you're saying is for you as a residential homeowner, a small business owner, if the state wasn't putting in $50 billion, instead of your tax rate being $1.15, it'd be back up to $1.50 or
Absolutely.
somewhere in those.
That's right.
So you're realizing the benefit of that state putting in that money, and that doesn't get celebrated because that's just an ongoing expense now that the state has
stepped in. Got. And a lot of folks don't recognize that that reduction on the state level that is supposed to be felt locally gets absorbed by bond elections and other things. And I'm not going to go into beating that up.
Increasing property values.
Correct.
Right?
Value increases and everything else. But what they did in Senate Bill 4 is they raised the homestead exemption to $140,000 from $100,000 to $140,000, and then for seniors 65 and over, they took it up to $150,000. And so, no one's going to tell you that's bad.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I think for the overall improvement of Texas, it would be better to put those dollars into compression. Now, I want to be clear. There's a reason they're chasing homestead more than compression, is that they get a greater impact to the voter.
Sure.
Into that voting taxpayer. I mean, I see more of it. You see more of it on that homestead.
Sure.
And
absolutely.
so that's, and they get more, lack of a better way to say it, you get more bang for the buck on that dollar.
Right.
So if you do compression, we get a little improvement. If you do that homestead exemption on the home side, you see a greater improvement than you would see with straight compression. And that's why they're choosing to prioritize the homestead exemption, is that it gives the homeowner a little a more clear deal.
And as a voter, you're going to have the final say.
I'm all for it.
The voters this November, that requires a change to our state constitution in order to change the way our tax structure is. And so if you're listening today, we'll have an episode later on when it focuses in on all of the ballot initiatives that will be this November, and you'll be able to vote on this homestead exemption or not.
And we're all going to vote for it.
I kind of bet it passes.
Oh, it's going to pass overwhelmingly, and it should. I mean, it's good to do it, but I do worry that we go too far down that road of splitting between the business community and the home residential community, and a lot of that is the same.
That's right. And yeah, our goal should be to eliminate property taxes, but you have to fund schools. You've got to fund other things. And so the taxes have to come from somewhere. Let's find out the least punitive way to do that. In order to address the situation that you discussed, Chairman Meyer and Chairman Betancourt did pass House Bill 9. If you're a small business owner, you'll probably like this. And they did it to kind of bring a balance.
To bring balance. That's right. No, 100%.
And so tell our listeners a little bit about House Bill 9 and what that does.
So it increases the business personal property tax exemption from $2,500 up to $125,000, which, by the way, they did the math for me. That's like a 5,000% increase. I didn't know that on my own. And when Speaker Strauss made me the chair of Ways and Means, I said the fact that I don't count real well, is that a problem? But anyway, but it's going to accelerate. The real goal was to shrink the gap between a homestead exemption and business. But the other significant goal here was Texas wants to continue being the driver of new business.
That's right.
And so they're trying to reduce that entry fee,
That's right.
that cost on the front end of starting a business. And so this is a great thing they did to improve that cost of getting into business. And so it's a huge, huge change that they're making, going from, $2,500 to $125,000. I mean, that's a massive improvement being made by, again, Senator Betancourt and Chairman Meyer.
And the way that will work at home, you just divide 125,000 by 100 and then multiply that by your tax rate and for your school district, and that'll be your savings that you achieve. It won't be a 5,000% increase.
No.
And I mean, I guess it will math-wise, but dollar-wise, it's kind of small.
Right.
But to your point, the real strength of the Texas economy is to encourage people to go into business. And so if you're a realtor, if you're have a little small manufacturing, or you've got any kind of little business, if you're in a tree service business,
Right.
then you're supposed to be paying tax on that, and you can exempt the first $125,000, which is very helpful.
What's the difference between making it and not making it?
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, folks, you've heard about education, you've heard about taxes. We want to talk about water, we want to talk about electricity, and maybe get some more things in here. But we're going to take a quick break and hear from our sponsor, and we'll be right back. Thanks to a partnership between TXOGA and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas, now more than ever, it's easy for small businesses to provide affordable group health coverage for their employees through the TXOGA Healthcare Plan. With a TXOGA plan, members can choose the right healthcare plan and benefits for them priced within their budget with the physicians and providers they trust. TXOGA's healthcare plan is available to small businesses with between 2 and 50 total employees who are headquartered in Texas, members of TXOGA, and aligned to the Texas oil and natural gas industry. If your organization is not enrolled but looking for coverage, visit bcbstx.com/TXOGA. I'll say that again. Visit bcbstx.com/TXOGA to learn more. Visit today. Welcome back to TXOGA Talks. We're visiting today with former Speaker of the House, Dennis Bonnen, a longtime friend, and served together in the Texas House and worked together in the legislature. And Dennis has been an extremely impactful member. Dennis, thank you for making Texas better and for continuing to work for good policies. Folks, we've talked about education. We've talked about taxes. Electricity, Dennis, has been on the minds of Texans. It has been on the minds of Texans since 2021 for sure. It always has been, but when Winter Storm Uri hit, people were out of power. The legislature went into action. They're continuing to make reforms. AI is something we've talked about on this program, artificial intelligence, the demand on power that is going to grow. I kind of want Texas to continue to attract jobs and businesses because I want each generation to have the same opportunities that we've had. Get a job, a good paying job, raise your family. But electricity costs and electricity reliability are on the minds of Texans. And the legislature looked at this again this year.
That's right. And so they passed Senate Bill 6 by two kings.
I didn't think of that.
Yeah, two kings.
King squared.
Yeah, King squared. Ken King, the chairman of State Affairs in the Texas House, and Senator Phil King in the Senate.
Right.
And so those two gentlemen worked great together and passed a very good bill in Senate Bill 6. And look, I think generally speaking, the real issue Texas has, and you spoke about it in your lead into here, Texas had to make a decision. Are we going to say there's demands on the grid, so we're going to restrict investment and restrict job growth in Texas? Or are we going to find ways to meet that demand and make sure that we can continue to have a growing demand on the grid in Texas and continue to have the data centers, the AI, the technology, the oil and gas, the petrochemical industry? Are we going to do all the manufacturing? And so I think the legislature struck a good balance, and they will continue to strike a good balance of saying, we want to continue to be the place that you want to come invest, you want to come and grow, and we're going to have a reliable electricity system for you to do that in. And so a lot of dynamic things have happened there. And, sometimes people talk about this, and I think they did a good job of this session. A lot of things people say do no harm.
Right.
And I think the biggest issue when it came to electricity was making sure that they did not do harm to the opportunity of that investment and that job growth. And I think they accomplished that by passing Senate Bill 6. It introduces some new requirements on the large electricity users on the ERCOT grid, aiming to improve the grid reliability, which at the end of the day, it's all about reliability. Because that investment won't come if they don't believe they can count on it.
If you can't keep the power
That's
on,
right.
you can't have your systems gum up.
That's
You'll
right.
go somewhere else where you
That's
can.
right.
And Texas is a little different than the rest of the country, which
Correct.
we're proud of. We like to be different than the rest of the country. We have a deregulated power generation market. So you don't have generators that get guaranteed rates of return like you do in most regulated structures. And so that creates little differences, but we think we've grown faster than anybody. We think that's been the right decision that I think you and I were both in the legislature when that was ultimately made. Yes. And it continues to need to be refined. And so we want available, affordable power. And I'm glad to say that natural gas is really the cornerstone of our state's power grid.
100%.
And it's reliable. It doesn't depend on the weather or other factors. But we do have a mix in our generation capacity, and that's okay.
We need to.
Look, oil and gas industry is okay with a variety of generation sources. They need to be accountable, they need to be reliable, and it needs to be affordable for consumers. And we don't like the government picking winners and losers, but we want a platform where energy sources can grow. Nuclear is something that was growing rapidly when you and I were a little bit younger, just a few years ago. That kind of fell out of favor, but now it's back in favor. And in fact, Chairman Cody Harris. Pretty good guy that I know well.
He's your neighbor.
He's my representative, and a good friend of ours, State Senator Charles Schwertner, passed House Bill 14 that dealt with nuclear. And tell us a little bit about that.
So 14 is dynamic because just before the end of session, a few weeks before the end of session, President Trump signed 4 executive orders to really help drive small modular nuclear in the country, and to help create some streamlined regulatory environment to get those things up and going.
Now, when you say small modular reactor, we're not talking about the big nuclear plants
anymore. Not South Texas nuclear plant. No, they're talking about small plants
that can be put on site.
That can be put on site and really create significant megawatts into the grid and into that facility. And so what House Bill 14 by, again, Chairman Harris and Chairman Schwertner over in the Senate, what that bill is doing is it's creating the Texas Advanced Nuclear Energy Office dedicated to the advancement of the nuclear energy industry here in Texas, which really largely will focus around that small modular nuclear at this time. And then the key to this, though, is they put $350 million into that opportunity, and they're going to set rules and things around that. And they put parameters in the bill on how that would work. But it creates the opportunity that Texas, I think, is great at, which is saying we're going to partner with our federal partners because there are funds coming from the feds too. Texas is going to make a monumental commitment to this opportunity with $350 million. And we're going to continue to drive, like we like to do in Texas, to the front of this issue and be a leader and set the standard in America here in Texas. And it's just another great opportunity for Texas and for creating reliability into the grid and creating more solutions for bringing jobs and investment into Texas.
And that's what it's really all about, folks. And we think that these dollars, and Governor Abbott was a big champion of this
Huge
effort
champion. He
as
talked
well.
about it in the State of the State.
He did.
From the beginning.
He said it as a high priority for the legislature to look at. And what this says is, if you're going to invest in Texas. Bring it here first, and that's what these dollars will do. In the oil and gas industry, Dennis, I mean, whether it's nuclear, whether it's our traditional dispatchable energy sources like, the gas power generation, geothermal is an area that people are investing in, taking that heat from the earth and using that to generate electricity, or whether it's solar and wind or batteries. Batteries are playing a really big role right now.
Absolutely.
As technology continues to advance. Now, there are concerns out there, and legitimate concerns, about how the grid is operated. Is it operated as efficiently as it can be? And having this generation mix, does it distort the market to where the consumers don't benefit the most? Those are legitimate conversations to have, and they're the ones that we need to continue getting smart people at the table so that we can utilize technology to its fullest extent to make these work together seamlessly.
Well, and what we're finding is that at the end of the day, natural gas is the best answer, and you're not going to replace that, and nor do we want to.
That's right.
And at the end of the day, Texas is the capital of oil and gas and energy, and we're never going to not be that, and we don't ever want to not be that.
That's
and
right.
we shouldn't. But you got to have a mix, and you've got to make it all work, and I think that's what we're starting to see even greater opportunities of occurring here in Texas. Because the other thing you got to remember, if you're not playing in this game, someone else is, and you'll get left out.
That's a really important perspective that we kind of glance over at times. If we're not moving forward, if we're not making the right decisions, others are. There's 49 other states that want to knock us out of the number one spot. We're the biggest energy user. We're the biggest energy producer. And that means we have jobs associated with it. That means we've got the Texas Gulf Coast of ports that are exporting products around the globe, bringing those dollars back and having those jobs here in Texas.
The more people here in Texas in the summer and it being hot, the more we're going to have energy demand and the better we're all going to do.
That's exactly right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. I want to get a couple of more topics in. I want to end up on water because that's such a big topic.
Yeah.
But I want to just touch real briefly on public safety. It's such an important issue. It's on the minds of every family. There's been some things in the news lately about some state officials and congressional officials that have been targeted. Some have lost their life. Mm-hmm. Texas looked at this, and Governor Abbott made this a priority in the state of the state as well about bail reform. And I know Senate Bill 9 by State Senator Joan Huffman and State Representative John Smithy, both of them worked on Senate Bill 9 and worked on Senate Bill 40. And so let's discuss the high points of those quickly.
Those two are really significant bills. The key on those to point out is that they're constitutional amendments that go along with those. So the voters are going to get to speak to some of this too, and I'm certain they'll overwhelmingly pass them. But Senate Bill 9, it's an omnibus bail reform bill. And what it does is it makes changes to the public safety reporting system, and it limits the personal bonds for certain crimes, really the most dangerous folks. And more importantly, it restricts the release of violent criminals on bail. And the tragedies that we had seen in this state were violent people who were released on bail and then created more horrific, heinous crimes. And what this Senate Bill 9 is structured to do, again, by Chairwoman Joan Huffman, former prosecutor, tough judge in Harris County, and Chairman John Smithy out of Amarillo, a good gentleman, been around forever, smart lawyer, is that we cannot have law enforcement go arrest someone for a vicious crime and then they'd be back on that street.
And
you just can't let that happen in Texas.
To a family who has suffered tragedy at the hands of someone.
It's victimizing them over and over.
Yeah.
And so that issue is getting handled by them. And then Senate Bill 40 is very interesting also, because what it does is it says, look, we're not going to have public funds, state dollars, go to a not-for-profit, and then they'll use that money to go bail somebody out. And I got to tell you, I don't know if people fully understood that was going on. But I mean, that's something that I'd be pretty angry if I knew dollars that I generated through not having a high enough rate compression or high enough property tax homestead exemption, and then they're bailing someone out that shouldn't be bailed out and doesn't deserve it. But they're fixing that problem. And again, Governor Abbott put all in on bail reform.
He did.
All in.
And another little inside baseball here. If you hear of a bill number like a Senate Bill 9 or a House Bill 9, Senate Bill 40, that's because the presiding officer of that chamber made it a priority. And Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick designated
That's
these
right.
low bill numbers to send the message to the legislature. These are high priorities, and we appreciate Governor Patrick's leadership there.
The Lieutenant Governor, Speaker Burrows, and Governor Abbott, all three did one of the best jobs we've ever seen of saying, these are the priorities of Texas. We are the three presiding officers of our bodies, and the governor being the executive, and we are here to work together.
That's right.
And we are not going to battle each other over credit and public notification and acknowledgement. We're going to be the leaders Texas deserves, and we're going to partner, and we're going to have breakfast every week, and we're going to solve the problems facing Texans. And so when you point out those low bill numbers, those were all low bill numbers in the House and Senate, and they didn't fight over whether it was House Bill 9 or Senate Bill 9. What they did is they said, we are partners in making Texas better, and we're going to do these things.
And because of that coordinated leadership from Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, Speaker Dustin Burrows, we have this information to talk about today.
That's
it's
right.
Because it got passed. These
right.
got passed within the 140-day period. It's more 140 nights and days than it is just days. But they worked hard and they got it done. And so another topic that we just got to get in. Water is something that's been a part of my career from day one. It's very important to East Texas. I worked on it as Texas Ag Commissioner. Oil and gas, water is important. I've worked with communities, Dennis, that have been out of water from drought conditions. And our water capacity just hasn't grown at the same rate that our population has in Texas. And so the legislature looked at this, and Senate Bill 7 by Chairman Charles Perry, Lubbock, somebody that knows a lot about droughts from that part of the state. And again, Representative Cody Harris, someone who is actually from an area that has a lot of water in his district.
And everyone wants it.
And so I thought it was pretty smart of Speaker Burrows and Lieutenant Governor Patrick to put people to work together, a region of the state that doesn't have much water and one that has a lot of water, to come to craft something like Senate Bill 7 and HJR 7.
And let me speak to that. And one quick thing I do want to point out. Let me tell you, bail reform, water, property tax cuts, public education, school choice. I can tell you, every one of those issues got worked out with the Speaker, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, and Governor Abbott, and the bill authors and leading members of the House and Senate in a room together. But I've been asked in the past, well, was Governor Abbott real involved in this, or was he real involved in that? You betcha. Was the Lieutenant Governor, was Dan Patrick engaged? Absolutely. Was the Speaker in this thing? Yes, sir. But they also include those bill authors. They bring those members in. But that's important because that doesn't happen every time. That is not what happens. And you made that point a minute ago, Todd. When that doesn't happen, these successes are not one after the other for us to sit here and talk about after the session.
That's right.
But they sat in rooms together and worked through the details of these issues, and they delivered together, and they kept the focus. And that's true leadership. When true leadership says, I know I'm Dan Patrick, and I know I'm powerful, and I know people understand that, but I don't care.
That's right.
Whether I get all the acknowledgement, I care that we solve the problem. And Governor Patrick took the lead on that. Governor Abbott took the lead on that. Speaker Burrows took the lead on being together on doing that. So on water specifically, which I don't know why we're talking about. My wife drove down here and 2 nights ago, and she had to go a different route because there was flooding from all the rain we've had.
I think that's all we need to get
so we're good
now. The legislature to focus on water.
But HJR 7 is very important because, again, as you talked about, people are going to get to vote on that in November.
That's right.
And they need to go vote for it because this is important. But it's the proposed constitutional amendment that's going to allocate up to $1 billion annually for the next 20 years to fund the Texas Water Fund. And so what these bills, Senate Bill 7 and HJR 7 did is they put billions upon billions of dollars into water infrastructure opportunities. And I think what's really smart about it is they didn't just dump that money into a year or 2 years or a short period. They said, we're going to make $1 billion commitment year after year for the next 20 years because those water projects, they're not all ready at once. They're not all right at once. And you need that over time. And so I think it's an extraordinary commitment that they've made. Also, you have House Bill 500, which allocates an additional $2.5 billion to the water fund to kick things off. And so this is making a very long-term commitment that I hope and believe the people of Texas, when they go vote in the constitutional amendment, will agree with.
I hope they do too, because these water projects, as you indicated, are long-term planning projects.
That's right.
They are massive, costly projects. And I think what we have to recognize is the cost of water is going up, folks.
That's right.
It just really is. I mean, there has to be an economic impact in order to have proper uses of products. And whether we not like it or not, these public works projects are very expensive. We all are frustrated about the level of debt at the national level.
That's right.
Texas has to pass balanced budgets, which is
right.
a constitutional requirement, which we never want to change that from.
No.
But putting dollars set aside in these water projects should help every community. And there's a lot of good things going on in this space. There's no better way to do this than for you to get involved in your local community, work with your city planning department, and be a part of that process.
Well, we have the state water plan that all of this has to go through, and that's one thing that I think is very important. It's a bottom up.
That's right.
It's local,
regional water planning groups,
and I want to be clear: these dollars will be scrutinized, understood, and it will be the highest utilization of creating water opportunities that will be what gets funded. And that's a big deal.
And here's the thing. If one part of Texas suffers, we all suffer.
That's right.
We've all got to move forward, and we need to do that so that Texas continue to be the leading state in the nation, and our nation can continue to lead the world. Dennis, I think you and I probably could talk for another 2 days here, but our listeners probably don't have that much time to listen to you and I. But you've brought some real good insight to this. Appreciate your time. Any closing thoughts here to end up with our listeners here?
I think the final thought, and I've kind of already touched on this, but look, major issues facing the state of Texas got major solutions this session. And you don't get major solutions to big problems without great leadership and great collaboration. And I think that's the message out of this session. I've been asked several times, what's the big takeaway of the session? Well, the big takeaway is you had Governor Abbott, you had Lieutenant Governor Patrick, and you had Speaker Burrows partnering to do big things to solve big challenges facing Texas so that Texas continues to be great. And by the way, it's not just about those three. When those three partner, though, it brings this environment of collaboration between House and Senate members. And that's who does this work. That's who does the nuts and bolts, the blocking and tackling. And that's why we made a point, you were great about that, of talking about these bill authors, because they're the ones who are grinding and doing the work. And then it's those three leaders in the end, candidly, if they're collaborating and working together, that grind of that House and Senate chair or bill authors, that comes to fruition because those three leaders are not worried about their individual credit, their individual agenda. They're worried about solving those problems together. And that's what is the great result of this session.
Well, folks, it's really all dependent upon you. These elected officials are the ones that have been working and leaving their homes and coming to Austin for the last 140 days. But you're the ones who enable that to happen because you vote for the men and women that serve. And please pay attention to that. Go to these town hall meetings, visit, give your feedback. It's really a drain on the members. They're away from their families. It's not like they just casually come down there for a couple of days and go back. They're really dug in, and you made a good point of bringing that out. This kind of wraps up our time for today. We appreciate those of you that are listening to TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight.
The views expressed on this podcast are not intended and should not be construed to be the views of any particular TXOGA member or company. The purpose of this podcast is to engage in candid conversations about energy needs, energy security, and the future of energy.